Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Greg always thought he knew his wife. 15 years of marriage seemed more than enough to understand every expression, every silence, every shift in her mood. But that Tuesday afternoon, when her voice didn't come over the phone, just a cold message, "I'm busy," something inside him broke. It wasn't the message itself, but the absence in its tone, the emotional distance packed into just 2 words. Greg was in the office of the food distribution company where he worked as operations manager, surrounded by spreadsheets and inventory reports, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He stared at his phone for long seconds, rereading the message like he could dig out some hidden meaning. Lauren had never been this cold. Even on her busiest days, she always made time for a quick, "I love you," or a loving emoji. This was different. This was wrong. Greg was 41 and prided himself on being a practical man. He solved problems for a living, logistics, distribution, tight deadlines. When something didn't work, he investigated, found the issue, and acted. And right then, every instinct in him screamed that something was broken in his marriage. Lauren, his 39-year-old wife, was a real estate agent in Austin, Texas, one of the top performers at her agency. Over the past 6 months, she'd become a stranger. She worked later, left earlier, spent entire weekends, closing deals. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, was now always in her hand, locked behind a new facial recognition password she'd never offered to share. Greg had tried talking about reconnecting, suggested couples therapy, planned a romantic weekend. Lauren always dodged, blaming the stress of a competitive real estate market. But that afternoon's message was the breaking point. Greg called again an hour later. Straight to voicemail. He waited another 30 minutes, pretending to work while the unease in his chest grew into a burning ball. Finally, at 3:30 p.m., he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his car keys, made up an excuse about an off-site meeting, and walked out of the office. The drive to Lauren's real estate office took 20 minutes during which his mind replayed months of small signs he'd ignored, the unfamiliar perfume, the new underwear hidden at the bottom of the drawer, the quiet laughter on her phone late at night when he thought he was asleep. The receptionist at the office, a young woman in her 20s with a practiced smile, said Lauren had left to show a property and wouldn't be back until the end of the day. Greg asked which property, trying to sound casual. The receptionist frowned, checked the computer, and said the system didn't have that info. "Sometimes she goes straight from showings to personal appointments," the girl explained, unaware of the weight of her words. Greg thanked her and left, his heart pounding. Sitting in his car parked across the street, he remembered something, the location tracking app. He and Lauren had installed it years ago, when Ethan was little, as an extra layer of family safety. It was one of those apps you install and forget, never bothering to turn off. Greg opened it on his phone, expecting it to be outdated or inactive. But it wasn't. Lauren's location blinked clearly on the screen. She was at a luxury residential complex on the outskirts of Austin, an expensive area he vaguely knew. He checked her agency's website. There were no active listings in that area. None. Adrenaline surged. Greg typed the address into the GPS and drove, forcing himself to breathe. His mind swung between desperate denial, maybe it's a new client, maybe the system's wrong, and a brutal certainty growing in his gut. He parked across the street from the complex, a modern glass and steel building with underground parking and discreet security. Lauren's car, a silver SUV he'd helped pick out, was parked on the side street. Greg turned off the engine and waited, his hands sweating on the wheel. 40 minutes passed. Each minute was torture. Greg watched residents come and go, a food delivery driver, a dog being walked. Then she appeared. Lauren stepped out the front door, hair slightly messy, wearing a blouse he didn't recognize. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall man in a perfectly tailored gray suit, gray hair neatly combed back, the kind of man used to good things. They were talking softly, intimately, in a way Greg recognized instantly, the body language of lovers. And then it happened, the man pulled Lauren around the waist, slowly, deliberately, and kissed her. It wasn't quick or casual. It was long, deep, familiar. Greg felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and took photos, 1, 2, 3, capturing the kiss, the embrace, the smile on her face when they finally pulled apart. The man got into a black Tesla, and Lauren returned to her own car, checking her phone before driving off, probably looking to see if Greg had called again. He followed at a distance until she pulled into a downtown cafe, where she sat alone for an hour, working on her laptop. Greg didn't go in. He couldn't. He drove back to the office on autopilot, his mind processing what he'd seen. That night at home, Greg moved. Lauren arrived around 7, smiling and casual, carrying work folders. "Hey, love. How was your day?" she asked, kissing the top of his head as he helped Ethan with math homework. "Fine," Greg replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "Yours?" Lauren delivered her rehearsed story, 3 houses shown, 1 offer closed, terrible traffic. Every word was a lie, and Greg knew it. He nodded, pretended to listen, waited. The kids ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed. Lauren took a long shower, and that's when Greg acted. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, charging. He knew her old backup password, the combination of important dates she'd never fully changed. His hands trembled as he typed it in. The phone unlocked. He opened WhatsApp, and there it was, pinned at the top of her chats, Richard Redhart. Greg tapped it. What he found in the next few minutes destroyed every last trace of hope. Messages dating back 8 months. Declarations of love. Plans for secret meetings. Intimate photos. Complaints about Greg. "He doesn't even notice I'm not here anymore," Lauren had written 3 weeks ago. "He's so predictable, Richard. You make me feel alive." Greg read it all with a coldness that surprised him. Richard was clearly the man from the condo, an affluent real estate investor Lauren had met earlier in the year. The messages mentioned dinners with his friends who knew about his new girlfriend. Greg realized their relationship was practically public in another social circle. Greg took methodical screenshots. He emailed everything to his own hidden folder. He deleted the sent message history. He put the phone back exactly where he'd found it. When Lauren came out of the bathroom, he was in the living room watching a documentary about World War II. "I'm going to bed early," he said. "I'm exhausted." Lauren kissed his forehead. "Sleep well, love." Greg climbed the stairs, lay beside her when she finally got into bed, and stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling, planning. The next morning, Wednesday, Greg called in sick with a family emergency and left early. His first stop was the office of a divorce lawyer a colleague had recommended years ago over lunch. The lawyer, a mid-50s man named Martin Hayes, listened to Greg's story with a calm, experienced expression. "Do you have proof?" Martin asked. Greg showed him the photos of the kiss, the WhatsApp screenshots. Martin nodded slowly. "In Texas, we have fault divorce. Adultery can affect asset division and custody. You did right documenting everything. We'll need more." He recommended a forensic accountant to review their joint finances and suggested Greg keep discreet surveillance for a few more days. Greg also went to an electronics store and bought a small, discreet security camera. That afternoon, he installed it in the garage, angled to capture the house entrance. On Thursday night, Greg made up a last-minute work trip to San Antonio, something common in his field. Lauren seemed relieved. "Okay, honey. When are you back?" "Saturday morning," Greg lied. He checked into a hotel 15 minutes from home and monitored the camera through his phone. At 2 a.m. Friday, the camera caught exactly what Greg expected, and feared, a black Tesla pulling up to the driveway. Richard getting out. Lauren opening the door, still in a robe. Them kissing on the threshold of the house where Greg raised his children. Richard walking inside. The door closing. Greg watched for 30 seconds before turning off the app, unable to go on. He drank half a glass of whiskey, the first in months, and forced himself to sleep. On Friday morning, Greg called Martin and sent the video. "That's more than enough," the lawyer said. "She brought her lover into the marital home while you were supposedly away. That strengthens your case significantly, especially on custody. Let's get everything ready for you to confront her this weekend." Greg also sent the evidence to the forensic accountant, who began reviewing bank transactions. Within hours, the accountant called back. There were significant charges Lauren had made without discussion: expensive jewelry from a luxury boutique, romantic dinners, even payments to a resort spa where she and Richard had clearly spent a weekend. All charged to their joint credit card. Saturday morning, Greg asked his parents to pick up Ethan and Lily for the day. "I need to talk to Mom about some things," he explained vaguely. The kids, thrilled at the prospect of time with their grandparents, left happily. Lauren was in the kitchen making coffee when Greg walked in and placed a thick envelope on the marble counter. "What's this?" she asked, still in pajamas, her hair in a messy bun. Greg didn't answer right away. He opened the envelope and spread the printed photos across the counter, Lauren and Richard kissing at the condo door. Enlarged screenshots of WhatsApp messages highlighted. Bank statements with red circles around suspicious transactions. And finally, frames from the security camera video showing Richard entering their home at 2 a.m. Lauren froze completely. Color drained from her face. "Greg," he raised his hand, cutting her off. "You said you were busy, Lauren. That's what you told me Tuesday. You were busy." His voice was low, controlled, but thick with venom. "Busy with what, exactly? Busy destroying our family? Busy screwing a client in the house we both paid for?" Lauren stepped back as if slapped. This isn't. "I can explain," Greg laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Please, explain. Explain 8 months of lies. Explain why you brought this man into the bed where our kids sometimes wake us up in the morning. Explain how you looked at me every single day, kissed me, slept beside me, while planning secret meetings with him." Lauren tried to speak, but the words came out broken, desperate. "I didn't plan this, it just happened. Richard and we connected, you were always working. I felt so alone." Greg slammed his hand on the counter hard enough to make the photos jump. "No. Don't blame me. I worked to support this family. You worked because you wanted to, because you loved your career. I supported you in every way. And if you were unhappy, if you felt alone, you should have talked to me. Therapy. Honest conversations. Divorce, if needed. But you chose to lie. You chose to betray. Repeatedly." Lauren began to cry, tears streaming freely. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I love you, Greg. I love our family." He shook his head slowly. "You don't make a mistake for 8 months, Lauren. You don't bring your mistake into our house at 2 a.m. A mistake is something you do once and immediately regret. This was choices. Deliberate, calculated, selfish." He picked up another photo, one of the messages where Lauren complained about him to Richard. "He's so predictable. Remember this? You wrote this 3 weeks ago. You mocked me to your lover while I was here taking care of our kids." Lauren tried a new tactic, going on the defensive. "What about you? You're never really present, Greg. You work, come home, eat, sleep. When was the last time you really listened to me? When did you plan something special for us?" Greg stared at her with an intensity that made her flinch again. "I listened when you said you wanted to grow your career, and I supported you. I listened when you said you needed space to work on weekends, and I took the kid so you could have it. I listened every time you said you were too tired to have dinner together, and I never complained. But you didn't listen when I asked 3 times in the last few months to go to couples therapy. You didn't listen when I suggested that weekend in Hill Country to reconnect. You were too busy with Richard. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Lauren sat down on one of the kitchen stools, burying her face in her hands. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked, voice muffled. Greg crossed his arms, leaning against the opposite counter. "I already did. I hired a lawyer. I gathered all the evidence. I spoke with a forensic accountant who's reviewing every penny you spent on Richard using our money. And Monday morning, I'm filing for divorce." Lauren looked up sharply. "Divorce?" "Greg, no, we can fix this. Therapy, time, I'll end it with Richard," he cut her off with a gesture. "You already ended it with Richard?" "Because he left here at 5 a.m. Friday. That was less than 24 hours ago." Lauren paled further, realizing he knew exactly when and where. You were watching me?" Greg smiled coldly. "I was protecting myself. Protecting our children. Protecting our assets. Because clearly, I couldn't trust you to do the right thing." He picked up the envelope and put the photos back inside. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Richard right now, in front of me, and end this. Then you're going to leave this house today. You can go to a hotel, to his place, I don't care. But you're not sleeping here tonight. Monday, we'll start formal divorce negotiations. My lawyer already has the documents ready." Lauren tried to protest. "The kids, you can't keep me from seeing my children," Greg cut her off. "I'm not keeping you. But we'll establish formal custody. And with this evidence, especially you bringing Richard into the house while the kids were sleeping upstairs, my lawyer is confident I'll get primary custody. You'll have visitation, of course. But Ethan and Lily will live primarily with me." Lauren's tears turned to sobs. "Greg, please, don't do this. I made a horrible mistake, but I'm their mother." He felt a pang, something, not quite pity, but a distant echo of the empathy he used to feel for her. But the image of Richard walking into his house drowned out any remaining sympathy. "You should have thought of that before," Greg said calmly. "Now, pick up your phone and call Richard. I want to hear you end it." Lauren hesitated, but something in Greg's gaze convinced her he wasn't bluffing. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and dialed. Richard answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm. "Hey, gorgeous. I thought you'd call earlier." "About tonight," Lauren cut him off, her voice breaking. "Richard, I can't do this anymore. It's over. My husband knows everything." There was a long pause on the other end. "What? Lauren, what are you saying?" Lauren looked at Greg, silently pleading for mercy, but he only crossed his arms, waiting. "He has photos, videos, messages. He's filing for divorce. We can't see each other anymore." Richard was silent for a moment before his voice changed, growing cold and distant. "I see. Well, it was fun while it lasted, Lauren. Good luck with everything." And he hung up. Lauren stared at her phone, stunned by his coldness. He just hung up," Greg nodded. "Men like Richard don't stick around when things get complicated. He wanted the fun, secret version of you. Not the messy, public divorce version. Now you know what he was really worth." Lauren began crying again, but Greg offered no comfort. He picked up her car keys from the counter and placed them in her hand. "You have an hour to pack and leave. I'll stay here to make sure you take only your personal things. Monday, you can coordinate with my lawyer to get the rest." Lauren trudged up the stairs, and Greg heard her opening drawers and closets in the bedroom. He sat in the living room, emotionally drained but strangely relieved. The truth, however painful, was better than the lie he'd been living for months. 50 minutes later, Lauren came down with 2 large suitcases. She stopped in the doorway of the living room. "Greg. I'm sorry. I really am." He didn't look at her. "I am too." And with that, Lauren left, the door closing softly behind her. The months that followed were a legal and emotional whirlwind. The divorce process in Texas, even with clear proof of adultery, took time. Martin Hayes was relentless in defending Greg, using every piece of evidence to build a solid case. The forensic accountant traced over $15,000 Lauren had spent on gifts for Richard, trips, and secret dates, all using marital funds. Combined with the fact she'd brought her lover into the family home, this weighed heavily in negotiations. Lauren initially resisted, hiring her own lawyer who argued Greg was emotionally neglectful, and that Lauren deserved half regardless of the affair. But the evidence was overwhelming. The final agreement, reached after 4 tense months of negotiation, gave Greg primary custody of Ethan and Lily, with Lauren having alternating weekends and 1 weekday evening. The house went to Greg, who bought out Lauren's share based on a favorable appraisal. Asset division was 60-40 in Greg's favor, accounting for her misuse of marital funds. Lauren kept her real estate business but had to pay part of the company's appreciation acquired during the marriage. The impact on Lauren's life was devastating in other ways. Richard, as Greg had predicted, vanished completely once the divorce became public. He blocked Lauren on social media and changed his number. When she tried reaching him through mutual contacts, she discovered he was already dating another woman, a divorced businesswoman in her 40s. Lauren was shattered by how easily he replaced her. Professionally, things soured too. Austin's real estate community was relatively tight-knit, and rumors about the scandal spread quickly. Several key clients, especially those with conservative or religious values, drifted away. The agency where Lauren worked, concerned about its image, gently suggested she look elsewhere. Lauren ended up at a smaller agency, handling less prestigious listings and significantly lower commissions. Mutual friends took sides once the details came out. Dinners that once included both now invited only Greg. Lauren found herself increasingly isolated socially, dealing with the consequences of her choices in a loneliness she'd never imagined. The children, especially Ethan, struggled to process the separation. Greg was honest in age-appropriate ways, explaining that Mom and Dad couldn't live together anymore because trust had been broken. He never spoke badly of Lauren in front of the kids, despite the pain, but he didn't lie either when Ethan, with his 12-year-old insight, asked directly if Mom had cheated on Dad. Greg confirmed gently, and watched his son's face close off, disappointment settling into his young eyes. Lily, younger and less aware of the details, missed the intact family structure more than understanding the full reason why. 18 months after that "I'm busy" message, Greg was in a completely different place. The wounds hadn't fully healed, but they were closing. He met Sophia, a 37-year-old emergency nurse, through coworkers at a casual barbecue. Sophia was the opposite of Lauren in so many ways: direct, unfiltered, sarcastic, zero tolerance for emotional games. She was divorced too, no kids, and understood the complexity of rebuilding after betrayal. Their relationship began slowly, built on brutal honesty and clear expectations. Sophia met Ethan and Lily after 6 months of dating, and to Greg's surprise, the kids liked her immediately. She didn't try to replace Lauren, she was just genuinely herself, playful with Lily, respectfully direct with Ethan. Greg proposed to Sophia on a spring afternoon in Zilker Park, with Ethan and Lily present and in on the plan. It wasn't an elaborate production, just the 4 of them, a picnic, and a simple question. Sophia said yes without hesitation. Ethan clapped, and Lily jumped for joy. For the first time in years, Greg felt his family, reconfigured, different, but real, was whole again. Lauren remained alone. She lived in a modest apartment in a cheaper part of Austin, split her limited time with the kids, and struggled to rebuild a career that never regained its former shine. She tried reconnecting with Greg a few times through long, emotional messages, begging for forgiveness, suggesting friendship, for the kids' sake. Greg responded politely but firmly. They could be civil co-parents, but they would never be friends. Trust, once destroyed like that, couldn't be restored. Lauren tried occasional dates, but nothing stuck. She carried the weight of guilt and a tarnished reputation like too heavy baggage for most interested men. On an autumn afternoon, 2 years after the kitchen confrontation, Greg was in the bleachers of Lily's soccer field, watching her play with awkward enthusiasm. Sophia was beside him, Ethan on the other side, all of them cheering. Lauren was on the other side of the field, alone, clapping politely but visibly disconnected from the happy family dynamic unfolding without her. Greg watched her for a moment and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction at poetic justice, no lingering sadness. Just neutral indifference. She had become a stranger sharing custody of his children. Nothing more. That night, as he helped Lily with homework and Sophia made dinner, Ethan approached. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Greg looked up. "Of course, son." Ethan hesitated, choosing his words. "Are you still mad at Mom? For what happened?" Greg thought carefully before answering. "Not anymore, Ethan. I was, for a long time. But anger eats you alive if you let it. Your mom made terrible mistakes that hurt a lot of people. She's living with the consequences. But us? We moved on. We built something better." Ethan nodded slowly, processing. "Sophia's cool. I'm glad you met her." Greg smiled, feeling his chest tighten with pride. "Me too, son. Me too." Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Greg and Sophia sat on the back porch, sharing a beer under the Texas starry sky. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, studying his face. Greg smiled slightly. "About that 'I'm busy' message. That's what started it all, the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. If she'd just answered the phone that day, or responded normally, I probably would have kept ignoring the signs for months, maybe years. But that coldness woke me up." Sophia squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us ends up being the best too. You wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here, if she hadn't been stupid enough to let you go." Greg agreed, recognizing the deep truth in it. Lauren had destroyed their marriage, but in doing so, she'd freed Greg to find something real. He learned that love without trust is just a beautiful facade hiding rot. He learned that acting quickly, even when painful, is better than living in denial. He learned his children were more resilient than he feared, and modeling dignity and healthy boundaries for them was more valuable than preserving a lie. And he learned that justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, justice is simply moving on, building a better life, and letting natural consequences do their work. Lauren had to live with the choices she made, the lover who discarded her, the career that faded, the children who watched her with growing distrust as they matured and understood better what had happened, the loneliness of endless nights in an empty apartment. Greg didn't feel cruel satisfaction over it, but he recognized the symmetry. She had chosen Richard over her family. She had chosen lies over difficult conversations. And now she lived with those choices. He, on the other hand, had chosen action over passivity, truth over false comfort, self-respect over martyrdom. And he was reaping the fruits, a partner who valued him, children who respected him, and an inner peace that had seemed impossible on that Tuesday when he'd read, "I'm busy." That cold message had saved his life. And for that, strangely, he was grateful. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.